about some of my interests centered around egocentric understanding of the world. But I'll start by some premise of where we are and where we want to go. I don't know what your thoughts about whether we are in the AGI era or not. I don't know what AGI is, but this term came from a talk by Vladimir Colton a couple of weeks ago, where he called where we are is superintelligence. There are certain things for which machines currently are much better than humans. Right? We can't compete in marking or in programming anymore, or even in finding holiday planning. If you just, sit behind the machine, both your time as well as probably the outcome of what you produce is going to be inferior to current LLMs. So certainly, these are currently definitely better than us in certain domains. What seems to be missing is what I would like to call simple intelligence, right? It's things that are very, very obvious for us, like, mopping the floor or figuring out how to do gardening or just emptying the bin. These are the things we were hoping that AI will do for us. We were not hoping that it will compete with our, advanced skills. We hope that it will actually help us, and currently this is not happening. So some of my thinking is, how can we move these models from their current super intelligence capabilities to achieving simple intelligence? And perhaps, we think about how we learn both aspects. So if I want to learn about physics or learn about maps of the world, I basically sit in front of a book and I keep reading, right? And that's what LLMs currently are doing, and they're doing it definitely better than us. But if I want to learn about gardening, I don't think if I read 1 million books about gardening, I don't think I'll become a good gardener, right? So one could say we learn about it by doing it. And I think there is like a quote by Yann LeCun that says, you cannot learn how to drive without sitting in front of the car. But I would like to argue that actually before sitting in front of a wheel, you know somehow how to drive, and you do it by observing others, right? We kind of observe others, and that gives us the basic thing before we even sit in front of the wheel, right? We don't sit in front of the wheel and the first thing we do is we do this and we hit a wall. That's not how we start learning. We do a lot by observing others. And that's where I'm coming, is like really we do a lot of learning this simple intelligence throughout our life by watching humans do it. And then we go in and actually try to act. So this is what I want to do. And instead of doing this, like observing where people do things, my interest has been to put a camera on the human and observe what they do from their ego sense perspective. And when I asked Nano Banana to flip the first image into an ego, my first instinct is it was perfect until I realized it didn't flip the background. So actually, so it's kind of not yet there, but I was still impressed that it was able to kind of get the ego view from the exo view, and it's doing this through lots of learning. So in this talk, I'm going to tell you about 3 things I've been working on that focus on modeling from an ego sense world, and I'll start by single life learning or shifting the learning paradigm. And this is work I do as part of my group at GDM, hence the shift in the logo, and this work we presented this CVPR. Currently, we are in this era of what I call the machine learner. We learn from massive aggregated data sets that rely on web-scale diversity. Data is typically shuffled. The first thing you do before you learn anything is you shuffle the data, right? Because you do want to try to emulate this IID assumption that machine learners told all your algorithms need to be IID. Before your IID, don't even try, right? That's clearly not how humans learn. Humans learn from a single, continuous, egocentric, highly redundant, highly correlated stream that is sequential and contextual and non-IID. That's our main designing mechanism. So one of our thoughts is, how can we kind of shift from this more is more to this single life learner? Is web scale diversity a necessity to learning visual representations? And long term, we want to ask, are we missing something because we're learning in an IID manner? I keep telling the group, I think redundancy is not a bad thing. It must be a good thing. Like redundancy is our core. Like you keep visiting the same place on and on again, and that must be part of our learning mechanism. So what we attempted in this paper, and this is like a very baby step to do that, is to ask whether we can train distinct vision models exclusively from the experiences captured by a single individual, right? So we call this the single life learning mechanism. And we want to kind of figure out whether, because people move, like people give you all this, they go around and they capture life, whether we are able to learn these models, and these models eventually do align because they all are based on the same manner. Even if you live in one country or another country, or a big home or a small home, if we walk into this room, we all understand the same depth and the same. So somehow there is something that's aligned. And do these single life models generalize? And as a starting point, we're just asking how much they learn about geometry. So we kind of said, okay, maybe semantics is very complicated to learn. Let's just focus on the simplest thing, which is geometry. Can we all learn the same basics of geometry? And so we started with the basic geometric backbone. So this is the croco backbone. For those who know this duster and master kind of thing, the basic backbone behind this is a croco backbone. That means you take two views of a scene, and these are carefully curated data sets. And in our case, we're taking two different views from one person's life. There is a slight different shift here. So you kind of moved, you get a slightly different view. Typically, these models are trained, as I said, from curated data sets of two views. But instead, we want to replace them by two views from one person's life. You highly mask one view, and you try to reconstruct this view using the unconstructed, the unmasked other view. And that's the only thing we do. So we train a single model from each person's life, and then we want to look at these different models, and we want to compare them. And the first test we do, on the y-axis, we are comparing these models against this big croco backbone trained on web scale diversity, right? And we want to see whether this alignment emerges over time. So what you see here are models. The gray thing is the same amount of data sampled from web diversity, so kinetics 400 data. And you can see that, at the beginning, all these models don't align at all, so they haven't learned anything. And there is a point in time, really around 30 minutes of data, where these models start to alignment starts to emerge. And web scale diversity is not very, very far from walking tours, which is people walking outdoors, HD Epic, which is people working in kitchens indoors, and this anonymous live data for which we have up to 30 hours of one person's life. We don't yet have, large hours of one person's life, but clearly there is some sort of alignment. And when we take data that is not from someone's life, and you can look at the paper, like you take a CCTV camera video, alignment does not emerge. You really need this multi-view that naturally comes from people move. And when we try to this is think of it as a TSNE plot of where these models are, you can see that none lives just are very far. Web scale diversity tends to be roughly at the center of these indoor and outdoor environments. So through us being indoor and outdoor, somehow we are actually collecting this web scale diversity with highly redundant data. The next question is, do these generalize? Can you actually learn something that achieves generality? So we go to something like NYU2 depth. That means we freeze the model and we just do linear probing. And again, we can see that even though we're training on experiences of a single person, and the standard deviation here is different lives, basically, we are not very far, at around 30 hours, we're not very far between web scale diversity and only single person experience, despite the high redundancy. So what we want to ask in this paper is, do we really need web scale diversity? We need more people to explore this. This is a baby step. But yeah, the data and the models are out there if you want to try and shift away from this assumption that machines should learn the same way, in a different way to humans. Okay, so that's the first thing. I tend to speak quickly, so I can give you lots of content. The next bit is about hand-object interaction information. And this is work that focuses on how humans move objects. So what you can see here is, a hand-object reconstruction over time. But we want it to look not only when the object is in hand, but we want to look outside to when the object starts in the environment and ends up in the environment, and look at what's really happening. So the object starts being static, and there is a period of time where you're forming the grasp around the object. Then there is a period of time, we're calling it the stable grasp, before you leave the object again in the scene. And this stable grasp is really interesting when you try to study it. So the object actually moves in the hand, but then the vertices, the exact area that you maintain between the hand and the object remains stable, right? Our hand is very flexible. You can still manipulate the object while maintaining the same heat map. And the first work we presented on this is to try to kind of optimize this. So I'm going to skip the optimization bit and show you the more recent work we're presenting, this ECCV, which is trying to do this in a learning manner. We're calling this towards in the wild egocentric 3D hand object pose estimation. And really, we want to go from a single image to a full hand object reconstruction in a single forward pass. And clearly, as we know, if you want to do this, and you have the complexity of real life, again, this is not data collected in the lab. So objects are full and being used, and they're like heavily occluded by other objects. Very, very different from clean in the lab settings. You want to do it through first collecting data and then training a model. The first contribution of this work is a data set called Epic Contact, where we actually gave annotators a short clip within a stable grasp, and we asked them to label in the hand what is being contacted with the object. Then we have an efficient interface to map that to the object, allowing us to have a posed hand object mesh. So this is an example of what you get out of a single object, of a single image. So this is what's labeled in the hand, and then this is what's labeled on the object, and then together they can be formed, like brought together to form the geometry. And because we have these short clips of stable grasps, we're able to propagate that. So single frame labels, but a short clip during functional movement. And once we had the data set, then we have a model. The model relies on a dyno features which are frozen, but we also have a hand prior. So this is Willer, a hand pose estimator, that we bring together to be able to estimate in a single pass how you can go from a single image to a hand object reconstruction. Here, the assumption it's a known class. It can be a new example, a new pan, but it's only known classes for now. And I'll end by telling you about this new model that we've released. And it's based on trying to detect hands, objects in hand, and there can be multiple objects in hand. Hands are very versatile, but also what we call the second object, which is the object that the tool is interacting with. And so what we want to do is, instead of standard detectors that say this is a pan, we want to move to a phase where if the pan is not in the hand, it's effectively background. If it is in the hand, it's a first object, and if it's being manipulated by a tool, it's a second object. We want to take a strong detector and change its behavior from this to that. And that's what we do. The outcome here is quite impressive. This work was being done by postdoc Ahmed Darkharil. This is a model single frame that we're running it here on video. There is no post-processing and no temporal alignment. It's just working off the spot. And to really explain to you what's happening here, this is a good example. When the ball is not in the hand, it's not detected. When it is in the hand, it is detected with a link saying which hand it is in. And when the two hands come together, it's saying the two hands are touching the body and they're also touching the object. This is done by taking the hands 23 dataset and relabeling it to achieve significant improvements over prior work and building on CodeEditor. And it really generalizes. Because we build on CodeEditor, we have not trained on any in-the-lab footage. This is an emergent behavior of a strong detector. On the left, you will see the current state-of-the-art model, which is not very stable. On the right, the new model. Again, this is single frame, no post-processing. And Ahmed, who's done this work, really likes this example because only when the ball hits the racket, it fires as a second object. And when it flies, it doesn't fire. So, and again, we've never, we were not designed to run this. We ran lots of these videos from the web after, and this is another video to show you the scale at which this operates. This is now released. I think I got to go to the bit where it kind of shows that this model is released and you can kind of use it already. We're going to skip the last bit because I think we're running out of time, and just say at the end, okay. I talked about two things, not three: single life learning and hand-object interaction. At Bristol, we've been really working around ego and ego understanding. We have a huge, I kind of did this slide a while ago, and over the past 15 years, we've been working on all aspects from spatial cognition to sounds to dense captioning, planning and collaboration, skill, gaze, a very, very interesting topic and hot topic, especially if you don't have lots of resources. It's one of those underexplored ideas. Active objects, and recently single life learning. And I do get the pleasure usually to come and talk about these things, but this is a work of a large number of students over the years. Everything we do at Bristol is ego and ego related. And I'm grateful for their active work. I'm happy to take questions.